Come with me, toy fans.
Before I start this video, I have to give a massive shout out to Carson Metaxas from 3D Joes for giving me permission to use some of the imagery from his amazing website. Carson is a stand-up dude and a real pillar of the G.I. Joe collecting community, and this video would not have been possible without his kind generosity, so thank you very much, Carson. I'll leave a link to the 3D Joes website in the description below. The 1980s remains one of the best eras for action figure toy lines, with countless different franchises reaching store shelves. But three particular brands would go on to become the most popular of the decade: Masters of the Universe, Transformers, and my personal favourite, Hasbro's G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. First launched in 1982, Hasbro's 3 3/4-inch G.I. Joe action figure line was a reinvention of their popular 12-inch range of figures, which were discontinued in 1977. This new scale was adopted by Hasbro following the introduction of Kenner's Star Wars figures, whose insane popularity had made the 3 3/4-inch scale the new industry standard for boys' action figure toy lines. In order to one-up Kenner's Star Wars range, Hasbro manufactured their G.I. Joe figures with a staggering amount of articulation, and in my opinion, they remain the best 3 3/4-inch action figures ever designed. When this reinvented G.I. Joe toy line was first launched, Hasbro enlisted the help of Marvel Comics and the legendary writer Larry Hama to develop a comic book series that would flesh out the G.I. Joe storyline, and children were quickly captivated by the Joes' exciting adventures, depicting their battles against their evil enemy, Cobra. The G.I. Joe toy line was an instant smash hit, and so was the comic book, so Hasbro commissioned Sunbow Productions to produce an animated television series, which first aired in 1983. This cartoon propelled the franchise to dizzying heights of popularity, making the action figure range one of the most beloved toy lines of the 1980s. So in honour of my favourite 80s toy line, Analog Toys has compiled a list of what we think are the top 10 best G.I. Joe action figures. Hello G.I. Joe fans, my name is Tony and welcome back to the Analog Toys YouTube channel. And kicking us off in the number 10 slot is Beachhead. Rangers lead the way, so it's natural for Beachhead to kick off this list, and in the G.I. Joe mythology, the comic version of this character has a vastly different personality to the one depicted in the animated series. According to his file card, Beachhead is meticulous, patient and strong-willed. Yet in the cartoon he was a very loud, brash character who was obsessed with his position in the G.I. Joe hierarchy. The Beachhead action figure is dressed in camouflage trousers, a green sweater, and he is almost always seen wearing his green balaclava. Beachhead also wears a black assault vest over his sweater, which has pouches for 5 spare magazines, and he carries his red beret under his left epaulette. The figure is equipped with a black utility backpack and an over-the-shoulder ammo case, and is armed with a 9mm FX7 Wasp submachine gun. This figure is super cool and has a wonderful design aesthetic, and is easily the best G.I. Joe action figure that Hasbro released in 1986.
Your chin is down, your chest out, your gut in, your face mean, cause you are rough, tough, fighting machines!
Taking the number 9 slot on this list is a personal favourite, Hit and Run. Hit and Run is a G.I. Joe infantryman whose secondary military specialty is mountaineering, and the reason this figure is a personal favourite is due to the camouflage paint on his hands and face, which give the figure an amazing look that I just love. According to his file card, infantrymen don't march, they run. They run to get to the battle, they run during the battle, and they run to get away from the battle. The army doesn't call it running. They call the first one advancing, the second one manoeuvring, and the last one disengaging. Hit and Run calls it all running, and he's real good at it. Released in 1988, Hit and Run is armed with a Colt submachine gun and combat knife, and is equipped with a rope-filled duffel bag that is attached to a grappling hook. This rope is threaded through an abseiling loop on the front of his belt to assist him on mountaineering missions. Hit and Run was also available in 1988 as a Target exclusive, which came equipped with a parachute pack, and this version of the figure is extremely difficult to find today.
The G.I. Joe RPB launching and it scouts out the enemy.
But now Destro's taken on the RPB with his despoiler.
Number 8 on the list of the best G.I. Joe action figures is Stalker. Stalker is the second Ranger to appear on this list and was released in 1982 as part of the very first wave of Hasbro's G.I. Joe A Real American Hero action figure line. Stalker is a key character in the G.I. Joe storyline, having served in Vietnam in the same long-range reconnaissance patrol as Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, and he is also one of the few Joes from 1982 to appear prominently in the Sunbow cartoon. Most of the first issue G.I. Joe figures were dressed in olive drab fatigues, but Stalker stands out from the rest by being dressed in camouflage, and he also wears a green beret, and the figure is armed with an M32 pulverizer submachine gun. In 1989, Hasbro released the Tundra version of Stalker, which is pretty cool in its own right, and the figure comes with a white canoe. Stalker functions well under high-stress situations. He's intelligent and perceptive, and moves like some sort of jungle cat, fast, silent, strong. And the action figure interpretation of this character perfectly embodies those qualities.
Let's hope there's enough auxiliary power to give you a big surprise.
So after 3 camouflage figures in a row, we're going to change things up a bit here with the number 7 entry, Barbecue. I am extremely biased towards Barbecue because he is the first G.I. Joe figure that I ever owned. When I picked him up, he was being sold in the UK on an Action Force International Heroes card back, and when I first saw him in a toy shop, I knew nothing of the G.I. Joe or Action Force storylines. I picked him up simply because I thought he looked really cool. Barbecue is the firefighter of the G.I. Joe team, whose secondary military specialty is infantry. The figure is equipped with a backpack that carries foam tanks, which are attached to a nozzle gun, and he also carries a really cool looking axe. Barbecue was also re-released by Hasbro with a different colour scheme in 1989, when he was a member of Sergeant Slaughter's Marauders. Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of the Barbecue character as he's depicted in the Sunbow cartoon, but I feel the overall design of this figure is just impeccable, which is why I chose him over Snake Eyes and Flint all those years ago.
Remember, if a fire breaks out in your home, always test the door first. If it's hot, find another exit or yell for help.
Taking the number 6 slot is the Joe's counterintelligence agent, Scarlett. The only female member of the original G.I. Joe toy line, Scarlett is one of the most prominent characters in the mythology, and particularly in the comic book series, where Larry Hama always prided himself as writing her as just another Joe, and never as a damsel in distress. The big difference between the comic and cartoon versions of this character is that in the animated series, Scarlett is romantically linked to Duke, whereas in the comic book, which is my preferred storyline, Scarlett was involved with Snake Eyes. Being the first female action figure in the G.I. Joe line, Scarlett's body parts were completely original, and she cuts quite a striking image with her two-tone outfit. Scarlett has a shock of red hair and is armed with a power crossbow. Another reason I love the Scarlett action figure is because Palitoy recoloured the figure and released her as part of the Action Force line, and this version was named Quarrel and was the driver of the Action Force Z-Force Rapid Fire motorcycle. And this is the version of Scarlett that I had when I was a child. And at number 5 on our list is Storm Shadow version 2. In my top 10 Cobra video, I mentioned that I thought Storm Shadow version 2 was far superior to version 1, and I stand by those comments. Storm Shadow version 1 represents the character when he was a member of the Cobra forces, but the second version of this figure is drawn from the storyline after the character defected and became a member of the G.I. Joe team. Dressed in a white ninja outfit with grey camouflage, Storm Shadow version 2 is equipped with a red backpack and is armed with a sword, a compound bow and a ninja claw. This figure is absolutely stunning, and my favourite detail on this figure is the inclusion of the Arashikage Ninja Clan tattoo on his forearm. Storm Shadow is one of the most popular characters in the G.I. Joe franchise, and I feel that fans have largely ignored the disappointing aspects of the version 1 figure due to their wild adoration for the character. I certainly found version 1 Storm Shadow to be quite the disappointment, which is why I am immensely pleased with version 2, where Hasbro gave me the Storm Shadow figure I'd always wanted.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
That Joe's in trouble.
No, the Cobras are in trouble. That Joe is Sergeant Slaughter.
Don't mess with Sergeant Slaughter. He's as strong as they come. I've seen him take on 100 Cobras and set them on the run.
Meet Sergeant Slaughter and his Triple T tank.
Sergeant
Sergeant Slaughter is now a part of G.I. Joe. A real American hero.
Live the adventure of G.I. Joe.
And look out, Cobra!
Sergeant Slaughter comes with Triple T tank, Cobra figures and equipment sold separately. Now, back to G.I. Joe.
Coming in at number 4 is G.I. Joe's tracker, Spirit. The first two G.I. Joe cartoon miniseries that debuted in 1983 and 1984 prominently featured the characters that were released in the toy lines during the same period, and Spirit, the main tracker for the G.I. Joes, was a major character in the 1984 series. In fact, in the cartoon series, Spirit was often pitted against Storm Shadow, whose main adversary in the comic books was Snake Eyes. Charlie Ironknife, codenamed Spirit, is an infantryman and the first Native American character to appear in the G.I. Joe storyline. The action figure of Spirit is armed with an arrow-launching rifle, and he carries spare ammunition in his cassette backpack. The Spirit character is also synonymous with his pet companion, a Native American bald eagle named Freedom, and his costume highlights his identity as a Native American medicine man, and this action figure is among the most iconic ever produced by Hasbro.
I am suspicious too, Freedom. There is something strange about Dr. Metier.
As we get closer to the top slot, the number 3 entry is a figure that became the face of G.I. Joe throughout the 1980s. It's the First Sergeant, Duke. While Conrad S. Hauser, codenamed Duke, was rarely attributed to any notable plots in the G.I. Joe comic, he was the starring character in the G.I. Joe animated series and served as the team's infield leader. The Duke action figure was first made available by Hasbro as a mail-in exclusive in 1983, before being released on his own card back in 1984, and my Duke action figure comes courtesy of a gift box from Michael Mercy. My figure doesn't have the correct weapon, he instead sports a standard G.I. Joe laser rifle, but I like him this way since this is the rifle Duke is carrying in the card back artwork. The figure is also equipped with a helmet, infantry backpack and binoculars, and the early mail-in version also included an American flag decal that is extremely difficult to find today. First Sergeant Duke is such an iconic G.I. Joe character that he was even chosen as the first figure to be re-released in the original 12-inch G.I. Joe format as a Target exclusive in 1991, which is an honour only worthy of one of the best G.I. Joe action figures of all time.
Are you all right?
Duke, it's about time you guys showed up.
Taking the number 2 slot on this list is the G.I. Joe Warrant officer, Flint. While First Sergeant Duke may have been the face of G.I. Joe during the 80s, in the UK that role was adopted by Flint, and the character appeared on everything from comic book covers to walkie-talkies to Ladybird children's books. In the G.I. Joe storyline, the character's real name is Dashiell Fairborn, but this was changed for the Action Force release of the figure, with the file card naming him David Fairborn. Flint is an infantry warrant officer in the ranks of G.I. Joe, whose secondary military specialty is that of a helicopter pilot, and he's often seen piloting a Dragonfly in the G.I. Joe cartoon. With his riot shotgun and infantry backpack, I adore the look of this figure. Flint wears camo trousers, brown leather gloves and a black shirt, with 2 rows of shotgun shells worn down his chest, and topping off the outfit, quite literally, is his black beret. Perhaps it's due to the fact that I grew up with Action Force in the UK, but for me, Warrant Officer Flint will always be the poster boy of the G.I. Joe franchise.
Your robots are lousy shots, Commander. Did you program them yourself?
Before we reveal our top pick, here's what we consider to be the worst G.I. Joe action figure ever made. Sci-Fi. While I'm sure many of you will say that there are far worse figures than Sci-Fi, I chose this figure because I feel he marks a turning point in the G.I. Joe franchise, and when the Joes made that turn, they rapidly went downhill. With his neon green costume, this figure looks garish and is so far removed from the original modern military aesthetic of the brand that there was no turning back for Hasbro as they moved further and further away from what made the franchise so appealing in the first place. And so coming in at number 1 is the all-time greatest G.I. Joe A Real American Hero action figure, Snake Eyes version 2. The mysterious, ultra-cool, deadly ninja commando that is Snake Eyes. I mean, how could any other figure or character top this list? Admittedly, Snake Eyes version 1 is a great figure, but back then he was simply the G.I. Joe Saboteur Commando. But when the comic books turned him into a ninja, his popularity reached a whole new height. And where Duke was the star of the G.I. Joe cartoon, Snake Eyes was clearly the star of the Larry Hama comics. A significant character trait with Snake Eyes is the fact that he doesn't speak, which is probably why he only appeared sporadically in the G.I. Joe cartoon. But this facet of the character was never a hindrance in the comic storyline. In actual fact, it led to the greatest G.I. Joe comic story of all time, Silent Interlude. Legend has it that the design of Snake Eyes inspired the look of Deadpool, and you don't get much more legendary than that. Version 2 of this figure also sees Snake Eyes paired up with his wolf companion named Timber, and the figure carries a black backpack and is armed with an Uzi submachine gun and a ninja sword. Dressed in a jet black outfit with grey accents, Snake Eyes is the Snake Plissken of the G.I. Joe team, and the most badass G.I. Joe action figure ever made, thoroughly deserving of the #1 slot on this list.
Way to go, Snake Eyes!
So that's our top 10 best G.I. Joe action figures. Did you agree with our list? Please leave us a comment in the section below, and if you'd like to support the channel further, then head over to our Patreon page. I'm Tony from Analog Toys, thank you all for watching, and yo Joe!